coming on. We've got Chris.
Lovely. Well, it is now exactly 5 o'clock, so in which case I think what we'll do is we'll get started. So what I'd like to do to start with is actually welcome our main guest today, which is Neil Laughton. So welcome, Neil. He's got lots of inspiration to share with us today, and Chris has very kindly agreed to co-host the show with me today. So welcome, Chris. He's very pleased to be escaping from this broadband provider, which doesn't talk very much. It certainly doesn't like to answer calls. And we've got Muriel's got this lovely background, which no one can figure out where it's from, but it's her wallpaper in her living room. So, and I'm cheating. I've got a photograph behind me.
It's actually I believe it's New York.
Yes, so it looks very impressive. So I think without just a very quick little bit of the way of introduction. So in terms of today, today is very much about unleashing your resilience for today's adventure. Neil is a serial adventurer, as we probably gathered. What would be really good is just a little bit of an introduction, is if you could very kindly, if everyone who's online today, if they could very kindly just type in the chat what you're really passionate about, what you do, and why you do it. In other words, how you like to make a difference. So in the chat, just literally type that in. And also the good thing is we know that you're actually online as well, which is great news. So it gets a bit of interaction going at the very beginning. And whilst you're just doing that, what I'll do is I'll introduce you a little bit to the three of us. So I myself founded Business Growth Bureau about 6 years ago. Love to say it was all my idea. It was as a result of a conversation I had with the CEO of the charity. And that led to Business Growth Bureau being formed. One of the things I feel very strongly about is that in the importance of circular relationships. So if you think about all your shareholders, your customers, your suppliers, your staff, your associates, everyone that you can think around you, if you make everyone feel good about that relationship, then to me that's really important. That's what really motivates me and makes me feel I can make a real difference. Chris, do you want to give a little bit of an introduction about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My passion's really helping leaders to develop themselves and their teams and to build really highly engaged workforces. So engagement and people being fulfilled in their work is very important to me. And I'm the co-author of The Power to Get Things Done Whether You Feel Like It or Not. And I enjoy, Neil asked me why I do these sorts of things, and I enjoy freely really helping people to develop themselves and grow. So for 9 years, I've hosted the Business Elevation Show on Voice America, which is a weekly show, which is accessed in over 50 countries. I think something like about 320,000 different people accessed it last year, an average of 8 times. So it's my way of kind of helping and giving back.
Thank you very much, Chris. Neil, now we're going to also do a proper introduction to you in just a moment, if that's okay. So if I come to you in just a moment, and also let Chris come in at that point. So moving on quickly on to the next part. Just want to share a little bit of insights in terms of today. This is obviously hot off the press this morning. So this is what the Bank of England is predicting. They're saying that the economy will shrink by 25% over the next 3 months before recovering relatively rapidly in the summer and in the autumn, which I thought was quite encouraging, actually. Mind you, we're going through a massive dip at the moment. It also made reference to the fact that GDP will fall by 14% this year compared to last year, before bouncing back by 15% in 2021. So where the economy returns to something like normal, whatever the new normal actually is. Now, the reason I touch on this a little bit is that it is a bit of doom and gloom at the moment, but hopefully things will be gradually starting to improve. And also what I promised to do today is give you a little bit of insight into the bounce back loans as soon as they were announced. So in the last couple of minutes today, I will share a little bit of information about that as well. And we also talked briefly last week about what's the difference between good money and bad money. And it's worth just tying that in with that conversation. But we won't get distracted with that right now. Now, before we do move on and hand over to Chris, what I would like to do is just pick out some of these comments. So Louise, thank you very much for feeding back earlier on. David as well. Anthony, delighted you're online today. David Davies, let me just share what you very kindly said. So there you go. David's passionate about helping small business. You do it by coaching, mentoring. And why? Because I have the experience and belief I can make a difference by helping them grow. That's really nice, David. So thank you very much for sharing that. And Malcolm, you're just checking in on YouTube. So that's great. So obviously the YouTube stream is working. So really appreciate it. And Anthony is passionate about business, solving problems for my clients and making a difference in their day-to-day operations. Now, I will say with Anthony, he's one of these people that Chris and I have got to know very well over a period of time. And if you go into his office, he's got motivational quotes and statements all over the wall. He's also got these lovely wristbands with quotes on them as well. So very motivated and determined to make a real difference. And then we've got Louise, passionate as a therapist and wants to coach, support others, individuals, but wants to widen it. Farron, welcome. I feel I've got to know you almost better than my wife this week, Farron, as we've communicated several times over things, but welcome today. And I'm sure other people will join in as they can. So for those of you who just arrived in the last few minutes, if you could just type in the chat window, introduce yourselves, that'd be great. And what we'll do is I'll hand over to Chris and Neil in just a second. Keep any questions coming. Don't wait till the end to ask questions. Just keep questions coming. We may not come to them straight away, but what we'll do is at certain points, we'll introduce you into the conversation. So really, it's over to you now, Chris. If I could let you come at this point, introduce Neil, and obviously we then got a slide in a moment just covering the relevant topics. So
thank you, Rupert. Thank you, Rupert, and thank you everybody for joining today. Yeah, I'd like to introduce Neil Laughton. Neil is, well, we were talking about the subject of resilience and the challenges that we're all facing right now with COVID and this new paradigm that we're entering into. And when Rupert mentioned this sort of as a possible topic, we were discussing it, and the person that came straight to mind was Neil Laughton, who would be, I felt, a wonderful guest to talk about this. Now, Neil is not, he doesn't claim to be an expert on resilience, but as you will find out, there's probably few people who've really tested their resilience more than Neil. Now, Neil is an award-winning adventurer. He's also a very successful entrepreneur. He's a multiple world record breaker. He is a former Royal Marine Commando, a helicopter pilot even, pilot, and a Special Forces officer. He's the MD of Laughton & Co., which is an organization that helps people with sort of leadership and development. He has organized and led over 50 expeditions on 7 different continents by land, air, and sea. He's climbed Mount Everest with his close buddy Bear Grylls. I think he's been up in and summited with Bear. He has been up and done expeditions on Everest, I think, about 6 times. He circumnavigated the UK on a jet ski and Ireland. And he also built, which is, I think, is fascinating, he built the world's first roadworthy legal flying car, and he flew it and took it on a journey 10,000 miles from London to Timbuktu. I've had the privilege of having a little go in that on the ground around his racetrack, which was great fun. And just a final other little point about Neil, and there's tons more I could say, is I found it quite fascinating. Neil, Breitling had an ambassador for sport, which was David Beckham, but they clearly didn't have enough sort of good-looking males in their kind of locker. So they introduced Neil to become the ambassador for aviation for Breitling. So he was an ambassador, and he has the most amazing watch, which I think could probably do everything, including flying helicopters and various things like that. It is quite incredible. So Neil, a great pleasure to welcome you today. How are you?
Chris, hi, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. First of all, I'm not clever enough to have designed and engineered that flying car. I was just the mug test pilot, dummy pilot for the journey from London to Timbuktu. But very flattering. Thank you for your kind, very long-winded and kind into it. The reality is, I'm very ordinary bloke, I'm afraid.
Well, I could have kept going and going and going with your intro. So it's not long-winded. There's loads more to you and loads more adventures, and we'll talk about these in a moment. But maybe what you could do, Neil, perhaps you could share with us. We're going to talk about some of these points here as well that get flashing up on the screen, about remaining motivated when you're stressed and how to turn ideas into action and the gifts of a challenge. But let's start, Neil, by perhaps we could chat about what lockdown has been like for you and what this situation means for you right now.
Yeah, look, obviously it's a terrible thing, and it's taken us all pretty much by surprise. If I'm honest, I have, dare I say, been enjoying the lockdown, principally because I've reintroduced myself to my family. I suddenly realized that I'd spending God knows 6 months of the year traveling and doing this and being busy, and I suddenly realized a couple of weeks in that I didn't really know my children properly. So it's been fabulous from that perspective. I think you may know I was working on a luxury cruise ship as a speaker for the first week of the lockdown and a few weeks prior. So I've had short shrift, but I got off the ship and just been locked down at home here in Sussex. It's thankfully been beautiful weather. I've also taken the opportunity to really have a think about my business and how I'm going to position it post lockdown. So a fair amount of time's been spent in the planning for redesigning websites to accommodate what's going to happen, or what I think is going to happen in the coming months. I've started writing my memoirs, a perfect opportunity, I think, to, categorize and write down all those stories before I go senile. So I'm up to 75,000 words. Need to probably cut it down a bit, but it's a good thing to do and hand over to the grandchildren at some point. Been keeping an eye on my fitness, so opportunity to, run around the field and keep as trim as possible. And in the last week, I have to say, for somebody who's normally quite busy and active, I've even started DIY, which means I'm fundamentally bored already.
And you did get delayed by 11 days on your luxury cruise ship, so worse places, but you were actually held up, weren't you? So probably a little bit of resilience, getting your head around whether you were going to get home or not.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about resilience, and I'm sure in a second, but there could have been worse places. Luckily, there weren't any at the time that I was on the ship. There weren't any cases of COVID on there, so we were a self-contained family of 3,000 or 4,000 people, wherever it was, and so I wasn't too worried, and I don't think too many were. Although we were obviously facing mayhem build up in late March as it happened. So I was comfortable. I just took a decision to stay on the ship that was sailing back to Southampton, and had an extra week's holiday.
Excellent. Bit of time to write a few of those 1,000 words as well, I imagine.
Sure.
So tell us, Neil, what from your perspective is resilience?
Well, yeah, obviously, when you asked me to come on the show a week or so ago, I've been thinking about it. And actually, if I'm honest, I always thought resilience was more about endurance, being, enduring. And actually, when you look up the old dictionary, it's more a question of your capacity to recover quickly from a difficult situation, which, of course, is, I think, perfect summary for where we find ourselves at as business people, leaders, and heads of families or whatever. And we're going to have to find solutions to this situation and swerve around them, find solutions, find ideas that are going to work for all of us. And it's hugely challenging. But I suppose the three key words I've thought about that would sum up what resilience really is about is being prepared, adapting, and recovering.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay now, Neil? I've just gone a little bit. Okay, great. So kind of adapting and recovering. And this is, as you say, this is a very unusual situation. I'm kind of wondering, you mentioned there about what you're doing during lockdown, and And with a situation where people are feeling quite stressed, and there is certainly a lot of feeling of stress around now. And one of the things I've heard some people say is I'm struggling for motivation. And I just wondered, from your experience, how do you remain motivated when you're feeling stressed?
Yeah, look, maintaining one's motivation for anything, even existence, is tough at the best of times. When times are good, do we remember those a few months ago? But in difficult times, when we're all stressed and we're clearly faced with a huge challenge, it is. Let's not beat around the bush. I think it is going to be very difficult. But for me, all the challenges I faced in my life, what's got me through ultimately is focusing on the end goal. And I think if you can, if the whatever the challenge is, if you can be really passionate and keen to see that through to the end and have that in your mind through the ups and downs, the difficulties, the challenges, then that's going to help. I always quite like looking towards the end goal in terms of what the reward might be, and it could be finishing the book, getting it published. It could be surviving, your business surviving the virus situation, or it could just be climbing that mountain, picturing yourself at the summit. And so focusing on the goal and the final outcome that should inspire and keep you motivated. And then I think it's a mental battle as well. Of course, resilience is all about controlling one's emotions, a psychological aspect, and also clearly in some challenges, physical resilience required. But I think if you're from a mindset, if you can have a pathway, a runway, be prepared for what you're about to embark upon as best as possible, and an action plan, an execution plan, if you like, then that too is going to help your mental strength to get through and remain motivated.
Yeah.
And I was reading a little extract from a friend, Lou Rudd. You remember a couple of years ago, he skied across Antarctica, one of the first of only two. An American did it and he did it, and they were in competition. They both pretty much finished together. The American just pipped him at the post. But it was a 56-day challenge, extraordinary feat of endurance. And Lou said to me the other day that he had blocks of 10 days of food. At the end of each 10-day block of food, he had a chocolate pudding. And that was what he really looked forward to for every 10-day section. So it's taking things in steps. Sometimes if you look at something like 50, 60 days, trekking ice through the ice of Antarctica, it could be too much. Break it down into bite-sized, manageable chunks. And so, maybe have some treats at each milestone that you reach. Have a treat that's going to reward you. Have a little minor celebration, something like that. And the other thing, giving you an insight into my resilience, if you like, is pride and reputation plays quite a significant part. If I set myself a goal to do something, I'm quite somebody who takes pride and reputation quite seriously, and I wouldn't like to be known as a quitter. So there's an example about 3 weeks ago. A charity head asked me to get involved with the Star 100 challenge. Star Trust is a charity that supports young, disadvantaged and vulnerable people in the Sussex area, Brighton and so forth, near where I live. Been supporting them for a few years, but they're in, like many charities, in desperate straits. All their 80 grand of funding is pretty much shelved for this year. So they come up with this idea of a Star 100 challenge, essentially replacing their 100-mile cycle ride. We've all volunteered, and I've stepped up to the mark to do 100 miles on my exercise bike on Saturday. Now, I don't know about you, but I only do 10 or 15 miles a week at best on my exercise bike, stuck indoors, a little bit dull and boring. And, 100 miles might be a difficult prospect. But in the last 3 weeks, I've obviously stopped the running and I've focused on getting on the bike and doing 20 miles one day and then 40 miles a week later. And last Saturday, I reached, I think, 65 miles. So mentally, I know that I can do the 100. It's, I think, important to leave a little bit in the bag. So for motivational purposes, to make sure that, you know, if I were to do 100 miles in the training, for me, that would make it more difficult to perform on the day, if you get my drift. And then just having a good action plan and an execution plan. So I'm going to do, I cycle roughly 20 miles an hour. I'll do an hour, have a break, another 20 miles, hour, and so forth, and then hopefully achieve the objective. The only last thing is put a little bit of pressure on yourself. You raise money for the charity, so you know, put it on the old Virgin Giving site, and then you can you know, it keeps you motivated to make sure that you're going to deliver on the objective.
Yes, when you inspired me to throw my hat in the ring and do the quadrathlon last year, I think there was
a great event.
Aspect was important. Telling you that I was going to do it was important to me, but also speaking to someone who'd come third in it a few years earlier, and his words to me were this. He said, I asked him for a single tip, and he said, Chris, he said, if you, over the next 9 months, if you consistently train every day, it'll be the best day of your life. If you don't, it'll be the worst. And that got me up every single day training. I just reminded myself of that and the pain I would be putting myself through if I didn't do it. And then that kind of helped, really. So you've been in some situations where, you know, people have kind of lost their heads. You know, you're the leader. Looking at some of the, you know, great people that we've got who are coaching and training and working with clients. They're going to be working with clients who might be losing their head a little bit at the moment. What are your tips for keeping yourself calm, keeping yourself positive when others might be losing their heads?
Yeah, look, what a great question. First of all, I would encourage everybody just to take a deep breath. It might be a long breath given the current situation, but you know, I think as leaders we have to be brave. We have to be courageous. We have to show reassurance to those who are struggling, those who are panicking, and those who, frankly, as you describe it, losing it or you know, getting lost a little bit along the way. So yeah, keeping your emotions in check is important, and ensuring, you know, that you make good decisions.
Yeah, and have you had any examples of that, you know, from your expeditions, you know, where you've had to...
You and I both know Derry Llewellyn Davis, who is recovering from the virus himself. I told Derry a few years back, about 5 years ago, that was trying to get the world record for the highest black tie dinner party on Everest. And of course, Derry was quite keen one day to climb Everest, so he agreed to come along. So Derry and 7 or 8 others, we went off in 2015 to Himalayas to get halfway up Everest and to get the world record for the highest black tie dinner party. We were at something like 6,000 meters on the north side of the mountain on a glacial moraine, and about 11:45, something like that, in the morning, just out the blue, the 25th of April, there was a 7.9 magnitude earthquake that struck the region. And of course, we were just trekking in a group on this glacial rocky moraine. And, you know, at that point, our world was falling apart. You literally stuff falling around all over the place. I was worried that the ground would literally open up and swallow us up, stuff like that. So, you know, all intents and purposes, and you get stuck in a fairly major earthquake that sadly killed something like 9,000 people, is a fairly traumatic 30, 40-second moment in your life. And yes, I have to admit, there was a lot of shouting and so forth. And you know, I just found myself naturally in survival mode and just thinking, you know, take a deep breath, what's going on, try to rationalize, you know, and the immediate action and reaction from my perspective, my brain was, if I stay where I am I relatively safe? And I was thinking about the ground opening up. It didn't feel as though it was. It was all shake, rattle, and roll for sure. But also avalanche was a significant risk. And luckily, we were not in an avalanche risk-prone area. So I simply gathered my thoughts fairly quickly, a few seconds after the quake started, just reassured the team, stay put, stay where you are, crouch down, and we'll see it through. And then when it was over, gathered everybody together, quick conflab, made a quick decision to climb up the mountain to the nearer campsite to get relief and get out the way, rather than spend a longer time trekking down the mountain to a safe place. So all that kind of stuff happened in a relatively short space of time. So even in pretty dire circumstances, you can still, as leader, remain calm, take a deep breath, reassure others, and make good decisions.
That's an important quality at the moment, to be able to do that. And I wonder, I remember in introducing you to Derry because he wanted to climb Everest. Have you forgiven me yet?
No, he's a great man. He's a great man.
I felt very guilty when you end up going up there and disappeared for 8 days, knowing I'd introduced you. So I was thinking about you every day during that period.
Chris, if I just come in for a minute, just to make sure a few other people have a chance just to, first of all, introduce themselves, but also possibly ask a few questions, if that's okay. Would that would that be okay with everyone? First of all, can I just start by welcoming Chris onto the stream? Welcome. Renato, you've joined us again. I'm so delighted. Pradeep, welcome. Thank you for joining in. Graham, transformational coach, thanks very much for sharing that. I'm delighted to see you again this week. Karen's obviously shared a little bit about herself as well. Had a lovely conversation with Karen yesterday, and thanks for that, Karen, much appreciated. And who else we got here? A nice little comment from Farron, and also a bit of a comment about the Welsh Rugby Club there, which is an interesting phrase there, isn't it? Bounce back ability. Wow. Okay, I'm just having a look at a few other things that come through. Louise, perhaps Louise, we might come back to that a little bit later on, unless you feel it's a good point to answer that one now, Neil, or do you want to perhaps come back to that one a bit later on?
I can't see any questions.
Yeah. Right, okay, on the screen it's saying basically Louise is asking, should we be changing the goals now? So I don't know.
Yeah.
Can you answer that? Do you want to
I assume she means her business goals, and I would say yes. The game has changed, hasn't it? Fairly significantly, and I could share with you some of the things that I'm doing in a minute. But yeah, I would say goals need to shift for sure. Whether that's your business strategy or the team or finances, your operational ability to deliver whatever you do, I think goals do need to be at least revisited for sure.
Do you think, Neil, I'm interested in this question because I've been having this conversation with people, and some people are revising down their goals, their financial targets, but I'm also meeting people who are using this period to put themselves in a situation where they can double their targets when they get into the new world. And I've met one individual who's doubled his targets anyway, and I just wonder what your view is on that. Should we be being kind of bullish with the situation? Where's being realistic? What are your thoughts?
But I think it kind of depends on what business you're in. My wife, she runs a catering business for weddings. Now, I can't see any hope of her business coming back to normal anytime soon, and so it would just, for me, be foolhardy for her to be projecting double-digit growth. Yeah, there are great stories of people DIY, people doing kind of what we're doing. Zoom and all that kind of stuff is booming. I think it does depend a little bit on what industry you're in, a little bit on your mindset, but it's a difficult one. I don't think it's for everybody. Not everyone's going to see the opportunity, but I do think it's important to remain positive and proactive.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my colleagues decided once lockdown happened that he wanted to help in some way, so he decided to become a supermarket delivery driver to help out, thinking he would have no work whatsoever, and within 2 weeks had to resign from it because he had more work than he'd envisaged. So that was a kind of interesting example of changing the goalposts a little bit.
Farron here, Chris, has asked a really good question, actually. If I just bring that up on the screen, it's for Neil particularly. Can you see that, Neil? So yeah. Neil basically asks, when you've had to drag yourself back from disappointment, failure, tell the story of the situation. How did you get yourself back to performing at your best? That's quite an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah. So I was running a construction company many years ago, and we were, I don't know, 17 to 20 million turnover, and we sustained a £250,000 bad debt. It was essentially, it was nearly game over, and you can imagine a huge disappointment doing a whole year's work and seeing your year's profit disappear and jeopardizing 10 years of bloody hard work. But from near failure and certainly huge disappointment, by not giving up, resetting some goals, going back to the earlier question, and then funnily enough, now I come to think of it, we did increase the business post that £250,000 bad debt because we were forced to. Very briefly, we were doing £250,000 projects, and I realized to get out of the financial problem that we got ourselves into, unfortunately, it was a fraudulent bad debt. There was no prospect of getting it back. We said to the team, look, we're just going to have to ramp up the scale of our projects. We've been doing it for 10 years. We just hadn't really had the courage to do it. And so I literally turned to the team after a board meeting and said, right, we're going for £1 million projects. So our goals quadrupled. And the funny thing was, within 5 weeks of setting that new goal, new target, a pretty ambitious one, we had our first proper tender inquiry. And as luck would have it, we won that tender. That £1 million project came through the door. That led to 9 others with that particular client. And from that moment on, the business flew. So hopefully that answers the question.
I think it raises a good point, doesn't it, about, and I know Google kind of famous for doing this, is that when you're under pressure, sometimes you come together and you over-deliver. All the extra energy focused around a problem. So I know they throw something, I think they call them goat rodeos, where they throw a kind of a serious problem, an issue in, and it's almost a tactical thing, and it has everybody running together, working over the weekends, pulling together with under pressure, and then they're going to achieve this amazing thing within a short period of time. So there is an opportunity, isn't there, right now to kind of galvanize ourselves, look at what's wrong and could be improved where we're unhealthy, and potentially, come together and deliver.
Well, you've just summed up exactly what I do for work now, Chris. Thank you very much. But leading on from that, I mean, my business of bringing small groups of clients to my place here in Sussex, in a kind of smallish outbuilding, is decimated. The chances of being able to safely meet for the next few months is slim. So, I've had to change my goals, aspirations, and methodology of delivering what I do for a living. And, I thought about it a few weeks ago and decided that the best course of action, particularly that we're leading into hopefully good summer months, is to take everything outside. And so I'm blessed with having a few acres here in Sussex. We've got a fire pit barbecue area that's ideal for social distance meetings. And so I'm just changing my business delivery plan to accommodate the situation. And of course, everybody else will be probably thinking similar kinds of things, coming up with ideas for what they can do to stay in the game and survive. And if you're not sure about what those goals or aspirations need to be, speak to somebody like you, Chris, or Rupert. Get some help, get some advice, seek test out your ideas with good people who've been there, done it before, and see whether it might work.
I think when you describe this situation, one of the key kind of premises we realized in talking to lots of successful people was that they create situations to enable them to act and get things done. You find yourself in a situation, if you're on a mountain and the survival is imperative, clearly. But we've got a situation right now where something which we haven't chosen with regards to the COVID, etc., has created this situation that means that we probably have to act. And it's a big enough reason for us not just to, wobble along, but to actually walk and take action. Any tips on when you have an idea on how you then take it through to action and make it happen without wobbling?
Yeah, I think it's important to not to have a gut, you maybe have a gut reaction to something. That's often intuition's good, but I would always try and test it out. So for example, with this outdoors meeting scenario, I kind of think it was going to work, but I've covered it off with not only my close clients that I know that I can trust, even if it weren't to come about. So if I call them up, I just put the idea to them. All 4 or 5 of them said it was a great idea. So you get some immediate feedback, some buy-in, and then for most of our stuff, I invite guest speakers in. So I then spoke to the next 3 months worth of guest speakers to see whether they were happy delivering their 1 hour's worth of insights outdoors and by a fire, and they were happy with that. No PowerPoint, so that kind of stuff. And then, okay, just take some action, be proactive. Nothing wrong with trying it out, giving it a go.
One of the things I think
doing nothing, I would argue.
Yeah, one of the things I think I know we've talked about it, that when you're feeling a bit of stress yourself, there's nothing like maybe focusing your attention on others, and by focusing your attention on their problems and things, it can alleviate yours and stop you getting into a kind of anxious kind of state, really. So any experience yourself of that, where maybe you've maybe felt a bit anxious about something yourself, but you've focused your attention on someone else to help you be more resilient?
Yeah, look, I think this is kind of a question about one's leadership, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because focusing one's attention on other people is all about helping them through a crisis. And I'm pretty sure that that's what we're talking about in terms of leadership. And I try wherever possible to just put people at ease, to bring them into the team play. Some of the exercise we do here at South Cole House is the team play, and getting everybody actioning on the challenge ahead. So I've been in the military, so we kind of do some problem solving exercises, and quite often the motivated leader will do all the planning and the execution all by him or herself, leaving the team players on the fringes, not really getting involved, and that's a problem. But I think there's also a real benefit for showing empathy for other people, and that is, as a leader, when times are tough, you should be in so focusing on others, concentrating less on the problems that you're facing yourself. Maybe you can go away and cry into your pillow later, but you're putting on a brave face. You're coming up with the strategic decision-making things, and helping others is a really great way to alleviate the pain and suffering that might be ensuing at the time. Yes. I remember going on a ski expedition to Antarctica. It was about 2012, and I had a party of 5 of us. None of us had been to the middle of Antarctica before. I was as anxious as any of my teammates, albeit a little more experienced. And as the Basler plane, ski plane, left us, there we were, 5 of us, stuck in the middle of Antarctica, about 150 miles or 150 kilometers away from the South Pole, and literally the nearest humans were a couple of thousand miles away. And I must admit, having a little bit of a worried moment, but I could see one of my teammates was really struggling, and so just being able to put an arm around them, reassure, get the tent up, get a cup of tea going, and just settle into our extreme environment for a few hours made all the difference.
I've having considered some of many of your expeditions. There have been some of your expeditions when you've suffered and other people have really suffered, and you kind of choose to put yourself through that. Resilience, it can involve suffering sometimes, can't it? I mean, what's your perspective on suffering and pain and anguish that we might go through?
All the way through my life and career, I've been amazed by our human capacity for suffering. And most people who haven't taken themselves to and through the pain barrier will be equally surprised at what is possible. And I've been to some dark places, psychologically, physically. Special forces selection really takes you to the edge. But if you don't give up, you keep pushing through, you can get through it. We've mentioned Everest. That's a really hard thing. It hurts. Climbing Everest hurts, but you break it down into 10 steps at a time, and eventually you get to the top. And I remember calling base camp on the radio when I eventually staggered to the summit. I think I just said something like, "We've run out of Earth." You can get through it. And there was a lovely tweet. I don't know if anybody follows Chris Hoy, the great Olympic cyclist. I was reading his tweet last week, and he'd done some sort of mass participation cycle endurance thing for an hour, and somebody had texted in, I've reached 35 miles on the indoor bike and I'm absolutely knackered, I can't go on. And apparently Chris typed back, if you're able to type that message, you haven't reached your capacity. Which was quite amusing. But no, we can endure, resist, we can keep going, and survive and thrive through enormous adversity. And I think probably for me, I know it's not a business thing, but my first attempt to climb Everest, it took me 3 goes, by the way. My first attempt was in '96. People might have read Into Thin Air, the John Krakauer's book on the worst storm in 100 years, a disastrous storm that killed lots of climbers. Well, I was there at 8,000 meters, 2 days and 2 nights. And believe me, it was a horrific time and conditions. And there was a man called Beck Weathers who was in the American team. And he'd gone halfway up on the final summit day and had run out of puff, and had turned to his team leader, Rob Hall, who sadly died, and said, I'll wait here for you to come back down. Of course, Rob never came back down, and Beck Weathers quite quickly, as the storm enveloped him, succumbed to death. And he was 300 meters away on the South Col, 8,000 meters, on the 10th of May, '96. And when I, approached his team doctor with the question, "Who's that over there?" literally 300 meters away, he said, Yuzuka Namba, a Japanese climber, sadly, she was dead. So he'd just been to visit, and also his team colleague, Beck Weathers. And he said this to me. He said, there's nothing more we can do for him. And so we concentrated on helping others. And, 12 hours later, Beck, a light bulb went on in his brain. He'd been given up for dead by his own team doctor. He crawled 300 meters into our campsite that afternoon. Now, if that's not a story of endurance, survival, and mental strength, I don't know what is.
Incredible. So what Farron's just asked, what drives you to keep doing these things?
Just a fear of a boring life. Sorry.
Yeah. And that's something I learned from you, Neil, which I think is a great testament to you, is what you do in life. And this is something you could all maybe consider, is Neil is absolutely brilliant at bringing adventure into everything. So, he does this with his family. We were very kindly invited us to go and stay once for a long weekend. And the weekend was just so adventurous for all the kids, from archery and, different things, different games he'd arranged. And, Neil just loves to bring this sort of sense of adventure into everything. So, we've got a bank holiday coming up. What can we all do to make life in lockdown a little bit more adventurous? Could be worthwhile considering. I just want to kind of, that point there you mentioned about the climber there. In your opinion, should we never give up?
Yes, 100%. Because my experience is, if you never give up, you're still in the game, and you can still achieve your goals, your aspirations, and success that we all aspire. I could give you three examples of where I might have given up and didn't, and came through very quickly. I was rubbish at school, as you may or may not know, particularly maths, but I had to pass. My aspiration was to get into the Marines. I had to get maths O-level. First time I took the exam, I didn't grade. I got a U. Terrible. Second time round, the following 6 months later, I scored an E, still a massive fail. And then I sought some help from the best maths teacher in the senior school, who gave, and I asked him for private tuition. Please help me. He did. I knuckled down, managed to find the formula, and scraped a C. So third time lucky. And that enabled me to progress with my career as a Marine and into Special Forces. And, I've mentioned, climbing Everest. It took me 3 goes to get there. Never give up. Why give up? If it's your passion, your dream, just keep plugging away, find different strategies, maybe test and adjust different solutions, but for sure, never give up. And then the OPL story, my business, construction, it was a long old 17-year journey, nearly folded at year 10 with that £250,000 bad debt, but we persevered. We found a new strategy for growth, pushed on forward, and then 9 years after that, got sold for a tidy sum to a FTSE 100 company. So my last piece of advice: you should never give up.
And probably a final kind of question. I mean, does this period we're going through now? It's not one of your adventures that you've arranged and you led. It's an external circumstance that's come in. But how does it compare as a challenge? And how would you recommend people perceive it?
Well, of course, we're still in it, and I'm not out of it. But I do see it as a challenge. I think there will be people out there thinking some good ideas. All I would say is test and adjust. Don't give up. Keep your focus. Be proactive. Try something. If that doesn't work, try something else. The last thing people want around you is negativity. This is a time for being positive, accepting the situation as it is. Don't minimize the difficulties, but at least make an effort to succeed and to get where we want to go. And of course, the alternative is pretty horrifying. So I don't see that there's any option.
Yeah. We've got a little point here from Chris saying, I think I put that up. Yeah. I don't know if you've got a response to Chris on this. I think it's an interesting one with
in business when you should give up. Delusional to carry on in some circumstances. Yeah, for sure. If your business is not going to survive, taking an early decision, minimizing the damage, and could be a good decision as well. So yeah, I agree with that sentiment. Although it doesn't come naturally to me to give up, as you've gathered.
Yeah, I suppose it depends upon the nature of the situation. I remember leaving. I was a founder of what was a successful business, and we were generating a consultancy a few £1 million of turnover, and it was very profitable. But it started to greatly impact my values, my ability to have some freedom, my family, and I made a decision to exit from that situation. The sensible one maybe would have been to stay in financially, but actually I created a new life around what I love doing. So, that's probably a strategic situation to move on. So I suppose it depends upon the situation. So Neil, I've done it in Himalayas and found my intention and commitment to lead me to train and had an amazing journey. I guess I'm still climbing in my professional and personal life. A comment there from Pradeep. Thank you for that. Neil, it's been an absolute brilliant pleasure as ever talking to you. Always enjoyed the experience, always learned something, and I'm always inspired by it. And I just love this idea of seeing this current situation as a challenge and taking on board some of those, those elements that you described here to kind of move ideas into action and to stay calm and positive and lead without losing our heads and focus on others when we're to helping them if we're feeling a little bit wobbly ourselves, and realize that actually we can all deal with a little bit of suffering. It's a natural sort of process. So I'll pass over to thank you for that, and I'll pass over to Rupert in case Rupert's got some further things he wants to talk about now.
Lovely. Well, first of all, to Chris, thank you very much for that, and also everyone on this stream who's been making points or asking questions. Sorry we haven't been able to bring everyone's up. Neil, I just want to say from a personal point of view, I 100% buy into what you're saying there. If anyone knows me, and Chris knows me, I think, pretty well, and certainly Muriel even more so, will know that I'm only about 5 foot nothing, or 5'6" to be exact, and that extra 6 inches makes all the difference. It will know that I'm a stubborn little git, and and you have to be very determined sometimes. And actually, running a business can be pretty damn difficult. So when you're in that situation, obviously those life-threatening situations we're in, also, and you have that situation with that bad debt with your business, that is no doubt it was that steely determination which really saw you through. So I think a number of people on this stream here have actually really reacted very positively to both what Chris has said, but also particularly you, Neil, very inspirational. What we'll do is we'll come back, we'll make sure we do run to 6 o'clock, but for anyone who's got any final questions or points they would like to make after that, by all means, we're happy to stay on for a few minutes and answer those. But just to make sure we cover a few things off before then, I'm going to just go back to the slide deck just for a moment, if I can bring this in. There we go. And I promised that we were going to visit these 3 things as part of the last few minutes. In particular to do with the bounce back loans and everything to do with your business, I think everyone recognizes that running a business can be a pretty lonely journey. It's quite tough at the top. You may have got brilliant people around you. And actually, again, Neil, in light of what you've shared today, no doubt a lot of what you've been doing has been to do with teamwork and strong leadership as well. And fundamentally, as an organization, we're really passionate about business growth. And in terms, I'll just give a very quick overview of this so people who want to join us next week can. So if just very briefly flip to our website, if you wanted to rebook for next week, if you very simply just go to the events and live streams drop down here. Now, if you've already booked in to attend a series of these, you don't need to do this again because you'll already be pre-registered. We've only just booked for today. If you were just to click here and then very briefly go into choose your date, so it'll be the 14th of May. Now, when you do this, you've got an option either to continue or choose recurring. If you choose continue, it will just book you into that one event, okay? If you choose recurring, it gives the option, I'll just touch on this for a second, to choose how many weeks you want to do it for, okay? Now, the big benefit if you choose that is that it saves you having to re-register each time, you'll automatically be invited in, and it just makes things a little bit easier for you. If you've missed part of today, if you go to the TV video section, choose previous weekly live streams over here. Okay. Now, what you can do is on the right-hand side here, just hover over those bits there. That brings up the different live streams, and you can see them there. Just choose it, and it will go straight into it. And either later on tonight or tomorrow morning, this live stream will actually be on the website, so you'll be able to go to that there. It'll also be on YouTube and Facebook and Periscope as well, so you can revisit it there. And finally, for those of you who are interested in actually taking their business a little bit further, you're very welcome to book a call in with me or Muriel over here. Just choose that link. Or if you wanted to benefit from a bit of training, which is a 62-minute video which explains a lot about how to win more business using LinkedIn, gives lots more market insights, you're very welcome to do that. And of course, we can give you the opportunity to complete a diagnostic questionnaire. So anyway, moving away from that now, back to what I promised to cover off, just bear me a second, we won't go into this part today, but that's available to you. I promised to give you a bit more information on bounce back loans. Now, interesting enough, this is not an area of my expertise at all, but it's very important, I think, for many businesses. As you know, a number of schemes were introduced by the government a few weeks ago, which was more suitable for medium-sized businesses, medium and larger businesses, and it meant the real micro businesses, of which there's 96% of business in the UK are one-person businesses in the UK, sorry, 1 to 10 people, I should say, strictly speaking, and therefore would not have been eligible under the scheme. With this is really well suited to micro businesses. Okay. Now the big plus with this as well is that whereas most applications have a very strict lending criteria, and you'll find the bank, the vast majority of the time, will say no. And the reason they'll do that as well is they're responsible for 20% of the debt. This part, the bank are not responsible for anything. It's 100% backed by the government. And you can see you can ask for small amounts from £2,000 all the way up to 50,000 or 25% turnover. And it's a very good scheme because there's no interest to pay in the first year. And my understanding is after that, well, this is actually from the government website, it's 2.5% per year after that. So it's way below base rates. So it's a very, very competitive scheme. Now, not surprisingly, it's very oversubscribed. But in theory, because the criteria for borrowing is considerably reduced, you probably will find if you've got a business that's been trading for 6, 12 months and is reasonably sound, you'll probably be approved for it. So they do promise in theory, if you make the application, that your application should be turned around within 24 to 48 hours. The slight problem is the banks themselves obviously being overrun. And if you go to the URL that's the bottom parts there, what you'll find is it will actually tell you which banks are supporting the scheme. And certainly all the big 4 or 5 are. And I believe some of the challenger banks are coming online next week. So it's worth bearing in mind. And I think earlier on we talked about the difference between good borrowing and bad borrowing. Obviously, at times like this, you have to be very careful how you spend your money. But one of the worst things you can do is run out of cash. Okay, so it's worth looking at this and also understand, don't hold me to this, but no director's guarantees are needed either. So again, from a company director's point of view, considering the terms available, it's almost better if you can borrow a little bit of money, put it into a savings account in your bank, keep it as a bit of reserve, because we don't know how long this is going to last for, or invest it very wisely in new products or services or a bit of marketing, whatever's right for your business. Now, Chris, in a moment, I'm going to ask you if it's all right to introduce Jessica and for next week. But what I would say is anyone who wants to hang on for another 5 to 10 minutes will gladly answer any questions. But Chris, back over to you again, if that's okay.
Excellent. So I have the cheeky privilege, having I think done 375 hours now of interviews on the Business Elevation show, of going back and handpicking some of the very best guests through that kind of experience. So Neil Lawton came very much to mind in that, and Jessica Richards I thought was a fabulous guest a few weeks ago, and Jessica talked with me about changing the Groundhog Day, and I just thought this was very, very valuable for this current situation we find ourselves in. We sometimes find ourselves in patterns of behavior that we keep on repeating and keep on repeating and keep on repeating. And those behaviors can, they can serve us for a period of time, but they can also hold us back, and we can have very self-limiting beliefs about money or about, what's going on in the world and those sorts of things. And Jessica's an absolute expert at helping people to, break these patterns and move into very, very high-performing, productive cycles. She was voted, some of you may be familiar with the Academy of Chief Executives, now Vistage, and she was voted one of the top 3 speakers of the decade at Vistage. And when she runs sessions in this organization now, it's absolutely packed with CEOs who want to be in the room. In fact, there's a waiting list to experience her. So she's got some great insights around the current situation, and we'll talk about that next week with Jessica Richard. So please do join us, and do tell other people about it as well.
Yeah, lovely. Well, thank you very much, Chris and Neil, for that. I think there's a few closing comments here we'll just try and pick up on briefly. Karen has very kindly fed back with that, which is about your steely determination, Neil. We've got Chris. Thank you very much for your kind comments there. Much appreciated. Farron, thanks for that. 100% agree. It's very inspirational. And Farron, another play of words, bounce back ability. Love it. Okay. Anthony has shared this with us, which is fantastic. Neil, I'm not sure you can read that. Can you see that okay?
Just about.
Yeah, good. You get that. Lovely.
Can I just say thanks very much for inviting me on the show? Great. What you're doing is fantastic, Rupert. Thank you, Chris. But also, if anybody out there wants to make contact with me, more than welcome to speak in Zoom or wherever else they'd like to do. So that would be great.
Yeah, lovely. Just a closing comment. First of all, thanks, Graham, for that as well. So quickly go on, Graham. Sorry, I didn't mean to show one slide actually with all the contact details. If you would like to show this for a second, so we got Neil's details there. Sorry, I do apologise, Neil. Neil's details should be here. Are they here? No, I've missed. Oh, Neil, I'm so sorry. I thought I saw it out. Can you just give us your email address, Neil, and also your contact number?
Yeah, it's neil@laughton.co.
Right, excellent. So, well, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for joining in today. Neil, really fantastic talk. I was not surprised at all because I already had very high expectations for today. So thank you very much. Chris, I'm really grateful for you introducing Neil to us. And I believe in the coming few weeks, we've also got some fantastic guest speakers come up. I think we're already booked out now till the beginning of July. So I think, Farron, you're due to join us in a few weeks' time, aren't you? And Chris, I think you're also introducing David Fox-Pitt as well, aren't you? Who's a serial adventurer himself, I believe. So.
Neil's close friend as well.
Yeah, good. No, thank you very much.
I cycled from Land's End to John O'Groats on a penny farthing last year.
Ah, wow. Pretty damn impressive. Right, well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a fantastic evening, and also try and enjoy the weekend as best as you can. So thank you. Cheers.